wore a revealing dress and went out on Halloween's party. When he saw me, his face turned red.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eva, and it's almost Halloween again. Every year this comes around, I think of what I've done, and I figured it's probably better to let it all out. I should probably start at the beginning of the chaos. My husband works for a big tech company, and he had to take a pay cut to start working from home a few days before our wedding. This was because I got into an accident just days before our wedding, and I couldn't walk. But Brian didn't care. We walked down the aisle together with me in a wheelchair, and he took care of me for a year before I could get back on my feet. He is more than what any woman could wish for. In his attempt to reintroduce me to society, he took me to a party his company was hosting, and I met his boss's friend, the CEO of a fashion company. His boss was happy that Brian would be finally coming back to the office, and they had a lot to talk about that night. But it was his boss's friend that had an interest in me. Mr. Davis wasn't shy with his words. He outrightly told me that I have a beautiful body, but I was hiding it underneath ugly clothing. Hearing such a thing after over a year of pulling myself around in a wheelchair was both a confidence booster and an ego bruiser. I was happy that I was beautiful enough for a top fashion icon to give me compliments about my body and beauty, but the fact that he said I was wearing too much clothes and called the clothes ugly couldn't escape my mind. He gave me his card and told me to call him for a reinvention. Little did I know that was going to be the grease on which I would slip and fall. I suppose Brian saw the joy in me that night and felt he had done something well enough that deserved some intimate time between the two of us, but I pretended to be too tired to do anything. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Brian and I hadn't consummated our marriage. First, it was because of the accident. I mean, we couldn't exactly make love when I couldn't even stand on my own 2 feet. Then it was about my self-esteem, which had been low since I was able to walk again. I felt I wasn't beautiful enough or worth looking at in the way Brian wanted to look at me. Or maybe I was just making excuses, I don't know. Regardless, I was still looking for a job, so I was now home alone since Brian had gone back to working in the office. I was bored, and I kept looking at my clothes in my wardrobe and looking at myself in the mirror. And before I knew it, I found myself calling Mr. Davis, telling him that I was ready for my reinvention. He was happy to hear this and invited me to his company for a fitting. The first skirt I was given was so short I wouldn't be able to bend and pick anything. I wore that with some fluffy crop top and heels, and when I stood in front of a human-sized mirror, I couldn't believe it was me. I felt beautiful. I felt powerful. A tear rolled out my right eye, and Mr. Davis was proud of himself. But he didn't stop there. He gave me some more clothes to try on, each one more sultry than the last. I loved every single one of them, and I didn't even know which one to choose. I would walk back and forth so he could see how the outfits looked on me, and he was impressed each time. When we were done with all the testing, I went to him and told him that they were all pretty, but I couldn't take all of them, so I'd just buy 3. He laughed his lungs out and told me that those outfits weren't for sale. They weren't even in the market yet. They were just his personal experiments and that they were all for me. My tongue almost fell out my mouth. He was giving me all the clothes I tested that day. They were 3 times the amount of my current wardrobe, which was already a lot. I was still in awe when he said that he had a proposition for me. I was happy to hear whatever proposition he had. After all, he just offered me clothes and shoes that would have been worth several millions. He told me that the clothes and shoes were mine regardless of my decision, but that more than half of those clothes would never be worn with the life I live, and I wouldn't be able to show off my worth. But if I came to work for him, the reverse would be the case, and that he would pay me handsomely. I couldn't believe it. He wanted me to be an escort, someone who simply follows him to premieres, parties, and shows while wearing his clothes. I was flattered, and the money was so impressive it almost matched Brian's pay. But it wasn't just about the money. I just felt seen by this icon. It made me feel special, like I could do anything. So without even hesitating, I agreed. When I went home, I didn't know if I should tell Brian because I didn't want him to get the wrong idea, especially given the kind of clothing I was going to be putting on for the job. So I decided not to tell him, not yet at least. I didn't have it in me to do that. So I put the clothes in a bedroom we weren't using. The first time Mr. Davis called was when he was going for a movie premiere, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me exactly what you wear, and I did that. By the time I walked into the venue beside him, all the cameras turned to us. It was like I was this celebrity with the world at her feet. Mr. Davis was happy with the results that night. Everyone kept asking about the dress and asking who I was. I never gave anyone my name, but a lot of people gave me their cards, hoping to work with me. My life felt like a dream. Attending balls, premieres, fashion shows. It was like nothing could ever go wrong. I tried my best to hide my new identity from my husband, and given that he was always working, he didn't have the time to notice things that were well hidden. I couldn't imagine how he would feel if he found out that his wife was going around half naked before cameras and hundreds of people. But you know what they say, there are three things that can't be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. On Halloween, Brian was going out. He had work, and he spent a long time apologizing about how he wouldn't be able to spend Halloween with me. Since he was back in the office, his boss was drowning him in work. And that was working very well for me, especially because of my life as Mr. Davis's walking mannequin. Brian asked me what I was going to do in his absence, and I told that I would simply hand out candy to the children who would come knocking. He laughed and gave me a kiss on the forehead, telling me that he would see me the next day and that he loved me very much. Then he finally left, and I felt relieved. I had so much to do in preparation for that night. Mr. Davis had sent over a dress, and terrifyingly enough, it was Brian who received the package. He was the one that signed in my stead. I was honestly just lucky that he wasn't the nosy kind. If not, he'd have looked into the package and seen the most sultry dress yet. I was to dress as a more physically appealing Harley Quinn. I began doing my makeup because it was going to take quite some time. I finished and I got dressed just in time for Mr. Davis, who came to pick me up himself. He looked at me and said that he knew he made the right choice when he asked me to be his escort. His compliment was so special to me that I felt my heart burst inside my chest. We were going for a Halloween party. The outfit I was wearing wasn't just revealing. I was more flesh than clothes. "I'm glad I met you," he said, placing his hand on my legs. I felt my hormones and nerves firing up with that simple touch. I felt like I was living on the edge and I could do anything, which was why I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I and Mr. Davis were locked in a staring contest when the car came to a stop and the driver informed us that we had arrived. By the time we got out of the car, it was like nothing I had ever seen. There were people dressed as celebrities and icons from the past, characters from the movies and comic books. Mr. Davis was dressed as Julius Caesar. There were paparazzi everywhere, and I felt a fright in my body. The same fright I felt every time a paparazzo took a picture of me. I was frightened that perhaps Brian might run into the pictures of me. I got past the paparazzi and into the party. There was loud music, alcohol. Mr. Davis and I took a seat somewhere, and it was as though the tension that was cooking between us in the car only got worse. We were talking, and before I knew it, his lips found mine, and soon his hands were all over me. And the next thing I heard was my name. I pulled away from Mr. Davis's kiss and embrace, and I saw Brian standing there with his boss. Brian was frozen, as was I. I called his name in subtle shock and asked what he was doing there. He shook his head in disappointment and turned to walk away, but then I sprang up, calling his name. He refused and continued walking away. I pursued after him, trying to keep up. By the time I met up with him, he was in the alley at the back. That was when he finally stopped and looked at me. He examined me from head to toe. "What are you wearing?" he asked with frustrated anger inside him. I told him that it was a Halloween costume, and he shouted at me in anger. He told me that I was naked and that what I was wearing didn't qualify as clothing. I told him that it was part of the job I had with Mr. Davis, and he was even more dazzled. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that his wife just said that part of her job description was dressing like a street worker. He yelled at me, telling me that I was married, and a married woman had no business going around dressing the way I was. It was a heated argument. Other than my dressing and the fact that he caught me kissing his boss's friend, he was especially pissed that I got a job and I didn't tell him. I told him that I didn't tell him because I knew that he would try and stop me, and that was when he lost his mind. He told me that since I wanted to be loose, then he'd be loose too. He left. I went back home, and he had found my wardrobe of clothes that Mr. Davis gave me. I knew because I saw the wardrobe open. I expected him to burn them, but he didn't. And he wasn't in that room either. I thought he went somewhere to sleep for the night, but when I got to our room, he was sleeping there. I was quite startled. I tried talking to him, and he simply told me that he was tired and needed rest, but it was all okay. I was even more terrified of this chilled mood he was in. The next morning, I tried talking to him again, and his answer was, "You can do whatever you want. You're an adult. It's absolutely okay. I understand. After all, it's just a job." He prepared for work and left. Mr. Davis didn't call that day. I was at home when I got a notification on my phone. I thought it was a message from Mr. Davis, but it was a notification that my husband had posted on his Instagram account. He never did that. The last time he posted anything was over a year ago, and it was our wedding pictures. Before that, he hadn't posted anything but pictures of his laptop while working. I had opened his notification and found a picture of him hanging out with his boss on a yacht. There were girls in bikinis everywhere. There were so many pictures that I kept sliding for almost a minute. My eyes popped so wide I nearly screamed. When he came back that night, I asked him where he had been, and without even blinking, he told me that he had been at work all day. I couldn't believe this guy, straight up lying to my face. I pulled out my phone and put the pictures in his face, asking him if this is what work looked like. He didn't even skip a bit as he confirmed that. He said that his boss took him to his yacht, so he worked from the yacht while his boss invited some people over. He then asked me why I was looking so worked up. I didn't have an answer, so I told him it was nothing. That night, I heard him making a long call. The call lasted almost 2 hours, and it was filled with giggles and I miss yous. I couldn't sleep. There was nothing anyone could say to me to convince me otherwise. Brian was cheating on me. The next morning, I asked him who he was on call with, and he told me that it was his ex. My knees felt weak after he said that. If that girl had her way, she'd lock me up if it meant being with Brian. But luckily, he chose me. So why was he suddenly talking to her and telling her he missed her? He refused to give me any explanation. He said we were all adults and that we could do whatever we wanted. That night, I got several notifications from his Instagram account showing that he was at a strip club. I almost had a heart attack. I couldn't understand what had come over Brian. This wasn't the man I married. I looked through his account and he had been posting nonstop hanging out. And when I went down, he had deleted our wedding pictures. It was more than I could tolerate. I decided that if this was how he wanted to play this game, then I'd play it too. I called Mr. Davis and he told me he was honestly shocked to hear from me, given the last encounter with my husband. I told him that Brian understood that I was just working. He was impressed and told me that he was having a ball that night. Of course, I jumped at the opportunity. I went, and all the while we were sitting together, I kept praying that Mr. Davis's hand would land on my leg like it did that Halloween night. The ball ended and nothing happened. He dropped me off at my place and I asked him if he'd like to come in. He refused. It was like he had decided not to be sensual with me. I asked him if I wasn't beautiful enough for him anymore. But he assured me that I'm still the most beautiful woman he knows. After which he drove off. I was shocked and didn't understand what was going on, but I felt an itch that needed to be satisfied that night. So I boarded a taxi and went to my ex's house, which was 2 hours away. I knocked on his doors and he was shocked to see me, but I knew Daryl still loved me. So of course he welcomed me with open arms when I kissed him out of the blue and he took me in, locking the door behind him. We had the time of our lives that night, and I was more than satisfied. The next morning I left his house, and just as I was about to cross the street, I saw Brian standing across and my muscles froze instantly. He had this smile on his face, not the happy kind, but the I knew it kind. I hurried to him and asked him what he was doing there. He said he just wanted to confirm his suspicions. I asked what suspicions, and he told me that he wanted to confirm how bad of a wife and a person I was. He told me that he knew where I went the day I had my accident. I went for one last hurrah with my ex, Daryl, and it was on my way back that I got into the accident that crippled me for the first year of my marriage. When he said this, I staggered back, shocked. He knew and he didn't care. He took care of me. He said he hoped that I'd leave everything in the past after I got married, but clearly that didn't happen. He said he knew everything. He knew I lied that I was a virgin, and that I refused to be intimate with him because I didn't want him to find out I lied. I was shocked. He told me that he never cheated on me. He never called his ex. The pictures in his Instagram are photoshopped. He has always been loyal, but I have never been loyal or truthful. And he honestly thought I would change, but in his words, a leopard can't change its spot. He told me not to come back home and that it's okay between us. Before I could say anything, he got into his car and drove away. I couldn't believe it. I think I've lost everything. What should I do? Please help me. I really love Brian. I don't know why I did what I did. Update. Hello everyone, it's me and I'm back again. The last time I posted here, I received a lot of judgment from a lot of you. Please, I do not need that. Stop sending hate my way. I'm already going through a lot. I did something wrong and so did many of you. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, no one is perfect. And please stop saying I don't deserve forgiveness. I do. Everyone does. Although my husband has refused to forgive me, he said there's no going back and I don't blame him. I understand the hurt and pain that I have caused him, but given the situation the temptation was inevitable. And I wish I could go back in time and right all my wrongs, but I know that's not possible. But I still pray and hope for another chance. I have cried and begged Brian because I can't bear the thought of losing him or navigating life without him, but he doesn't buy my apologies. He said I knew exactly what I was doing and that I don't deserve him. And that's true. Brian is the best husband for anyone, and especially me, but that doesn't mean I don't love him. I love him and I still want him back. But there's nothing that I can do to change his mind because he has filed for a divorce and he's so serious about it. I was so desperate to the point that I had to go to his boss and begged him to plead with Brian to take me back, and unfortunately his boss also shared the same view with him. They can't see beyond what I did to Brian. It's so sad and I don't know what to do anymore. I hate myself for doing that to him, for ruining something so perfect. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. I even went to Mr. Davis, but he denied me any job opportunity. He dumped me as well. He told me that I wasn't qualified to work with him. He said he doesn't like to deal with women who throw themselves at men, and he had liked it when I was not desperate and he was the one doing all the chasing and touching. I don't even know what to do anymore. I didn't know where to go after Brian rejected me and Mr. Davis refused to work with me. So I lodged in a hotel for a while and exhausted the little money I had, so I was left with no choice than to move in with Daryl, my foolish ex. I hate him so much now, and I can't believe I risked my marriage because of him. A man like him that can't even take care of me. He is very broke, and he is busy flirting around with other women right in front of me, and he is claiming I don't own him, and we are not dating, so he can do whatever the hell he wants. If I dare speak up, he would shout and boast of how he let a rat like me in after everyone I had abandoned him for threw me away, and that I should know that he is the only useful person in my life and he will always be, and I should never forget it. But that's his point of view because the only thing he was useful at was on bed, but now that irritates me the most. He treats me like a slave, makes me do all the house chores, wash his clothes, and even take care of his witches. He also makes them mock me, but I don't have a choice because I don't have anywhere to go. I'm stuck here still hoping that maybe this is not the end of everything for me. But what can I do? Nothing. No one would talk to me. Even my family members are ashamed of me. They didn't even care about me in the first place. Now I know the only person that truly cared about me was Brian, and I can't believe I did this to us. I don't know how to forgive myself either. It's hard going through this phase of life. So this is my life now, pathetic Eva. Broke, jobless, and homeless because this place that I am living right now is worse than prison. I cry every day because there is nothing else to do than to regret my actions all over again and again. I pray for the strength to survive as life goes on, because the weight of guilt and disappointment in myself is dragging me down. I just want my husband back, but I know deep down that's not possible. Anyways, I appreciate everyone for their opinions, advice, and comments, both good and bad. And thank you for reading my story. For now, I'll just try to hang on and hope for better days ahead. Hello, Redditors. My name is Princess, and I'm 29 years old, and I think I'm in... Okay, not I think. I know I'm in a very big trouble. My husband caught me with my lover, and the problem is it's not just any lover. My lover is actually his son, my stepson. So, I had thought I was home alone when I entered my stepson's room, but I wasn't. My husband entered his room without knocking as he usually did and met his son and I having sex. He literally caught us in the act. And now I don't even know what to do because I'm really scared of his reaction. He probably had seen me enter his son's room, but I had thought he had gone on the trip he had told me he was going on very early that morning. So when I had woken up that morning and hadn't seen him beside me on the bed, I had just quickly taken a shower, worn my sexy lingerie, and gone into my stepson's room. Only to discover that my husband had not even left in the first place, but had just gone to get some groceries so he could make breakfast for us. Hold on. Before you judge me, hear me out first, please. It had not been my fault. I met my husband, Sam, when I was barely a teenager. My parents had been dirt poor, and they were struggling to pay for anything that had to do with the house. My dad worked as his gatekeeper, while my mom was Sam's cook. He was really nice to them, though, and he would always come through for them whenever they needed him to. But eventually, the struggle just became too much when I got very sick. I had only been 13 years old when my heart defect had been discovered. I had a defect called ASD, atrial septal defect. It's a heart condition where there's a hole in the wall that separates the two upper chambers of the heart. In layman's terms, think of it like a house with two rooms. Normally, there's a door between the rooms that closes tightly, but with ASD, the door is stuck open, allowing air, but in this case blood, to flow between the rooms. So I literally needed to have open heart surgery, and my parents did not have the money for it. Eventually, my dad had to go to Sam to ask for the money, and he had paid for everything. which included the pending hospital bills and the surgery. He even went ahead to request that I be placed in a comfortable room so I could recover rapidly. While kids start growing up and begin watching movies, and those cute cartoons ask who their heroes are, you'd hear things like Superman or Batman or things like that, but my own hero at that time had been Sam. I mean, he did save me from dying because my parents could not afford the payment for my treatment. I got better, and I was back and bubbly, and I had really adored Sam. When I was 15 years old, Sam's wife Elizabeth died, leaving behind her only son Andrew and Sam. It had been really painful because Elizabeth had been a really sweet person to my family and me too. It took Sam a whole year to get over it and bounce back on his feet, and by then I was already preparing to go to college. I tried applying for scholarships, but I couldn't get one, so the only remaining option had been for my parents to sort out the money, but they couldn't raise the tuition fee. They had thought it unwise to ask Sam for the money because he had already done enough with paying for the treatment for my defect and also paying for the regular monthly checkup I had. But I had become really desperate because I really wanted to go to college. I knew I was bright enough, and I was confident I was going to do well as a doctor. My dream has been to become a doctor ever since I had that surgery. I heard after the surgery that I had suddenly developed a complication during the surgery, and it had been a quick save from one of the doctors that had helped me survive the whole thing. So then I had decided I wanted to become a surgeon to help kids like me who had heart problems. And I was desperate to achieve that dream. So I had gone to meet Sam to beg him to help with my school fees, with a promise to pay him back when I became a doctor and earned my money. Sam laughed and agreed with me. In fact, at that point, I had been so determined that I wrote down the deal and even signed it, and had asked Sam to sign his part too, and he had indulged me by doing so. I was so excited when I got into my dream school and also got my dream course. One thing I have always liked about myself that others mostly complained about had always been my strong determination. Whatever I determined to do in my heart, I definitely did, whether it be good or bad. That had helped me through some tough times, particularly when I had been sick and also during my days as a student studying medicine. It had also implicated me through my high school years, and a lot of teachers complained about how stubborn I was, which eventually made my records in school, despite my straight A's, not good enough to get me any scholarship. I had no time to date anyone while in school because of how hectic my course had been, and because of my strong determination to do well. By the time I was done with school as a certified doctor, my parents were so proud of me, and Sam too was proud of me. I was particularly happy that Sam was proud of me. It pleased me greatly, and I felt like I had achieved the hardest thing. Sam had been able to get me into one of the best hospitals as an intern, so I was able to put my skills into practice, and I had been really glad. Later, I had decided to train as a pediatrician, a children's doctor, because I knew how long it would take me to finally become a heart surgeon. I had decided to settle for becoming a pediatrician instead. To reduce the cost of transportation, I decided to stay with my parents at Sam's mansion. Months of staying in Sam's mansion really were bliss. Sam did not treat us as if we were his workers, but almost like his family, and I started to get really comfortable with him. I loved the fact that he was so attentive to our needs, especially mine, and he was always asking if I was comfortable or not. He insisted we eat breakfast and dinner with him, but my parents mostly refused the offer, so it was just usually him and me. My parents warned me off, but I did not mind. I thought of it as just having an older friend, although my feelings would say otherwise. I liked him a lot more than just friends. He was only older than me, but he related with me like a younger person would with their pals, and that pleased me in more ways than I could explain. Sometimes when he came back from the office, he came bearing gifts, and they were always mostly for me. Sometimes I would think that he was being a little more than friendly with me, but he never would say, and I hadn't wanted to be too straightforward, so I kept quiet about it. My first boyfriend was Jake. Jake had been a resident doctor where I worked as an intern, and he had been in charge of the new interns. Jake had shown his interest in me from the very first day we met, and he made no show of hiding his feelings even right there in the hospital. I felt there was no need to reject him because he was also a doctor, and therefore understood how busy things could get in the hospital, so there would be no need explaining why I missed a date or came home late or something. We were together for a month before he suggested moving in with him, and I had agreed since he had a car and could drop me off at work. Sam had not been cool with the idea, though, and also my parents, but I hadn't minded, so I went ahead with it anyways. 2 weeks after moving in with Jake, I knew it had been the biggest mistake of my life. Jake was the most unorganized person I had ever met. The first day I had moved in, The house had reeked of dirty dishes, clothes that had been kept there for a long time, and everywhere looked like a dump that hadn't been cleaned in days. He had made excuses of having to work long hours at the hospital and not being able to come home often. I had accepted his excuse, thinking it was a one-time thing, and I had even helped him arrange the whole house despite being exhausted from moving. But within those 2 weeks, I realized that Jake just kept blaming the hospital work, but was actually a very lazy person. I hated the fact that he did not mind leaving his clothes on the floor or leaving dirty dishes without bothering to come back to do them. And the worst part was that he could wear a shirt twice to work without bothering to wash it. He had been a dirty and lazy man through and through. I tried really hard to correct his behavior, and even tried setting up a routine for him so he could get things done despite his busy schedule. But Jake had become so lazy, it was annoying, especially because he thought with me around, I should probably get things done because I was the woman in the relationship. Eventually, after 2 months of battling with the same nonsense, I broke up with Jake and left his house and went back to Sam's place. Sam had been happy to have me around again, and despite my reservations, he treated me the same way he did in the past. It was not long after I moved back into Sam's house that I started to date this chef, Chris. Chris owned a small restaurant, and since his restaurant was quite close to my workplace, I usually stopped by there to grab lunch quickly so I could get back to work as fast as I could. I didn't exactly know who the chef was because I was almost always rushing whenever I came by the restaurant to eat. But that day I had been off work, and I had been forced to go on a blind date by a friend and coworker, Mary. She had insisted, and I hadn't wanted to stress myself by rejecting the offer, knowing how persistent she could be whenever she chose to be. But eventually, the blind date I was supposedly meeting had stood me up, so I sat at the restaurant waiting for a date that had eventually not shown up. Chris had walked up to me and asked me what I'd like to have, saying it was on the house. I had been surprised and also embarrassed because it meant he knew I had probably been stood up by someone. I had accepted his offer kindly and had just asked for a glass of champagne, but he had served me some very delicious food, which I had eaten with gusto. From then, we became good friends, and he collected my contact, and we started texting until he confessed his feelings for me. We weren't together for long, though. Chris and I both had demanding jobs. He, as a chef, was always too busy tending to hungry people, and because of how small his restaurant was, he only had one other chef alongside himself, and I was busy with the hospital's daily drama. So within a month of dating, we just kind of drifted apart, and we did not even have to break up before we knew we were done. I decided after Chris that relationships just weren't for me because of how quickly my relationship started and ended. But then there was Sam. Once Sam noticed that Chris and I were no longer together, he definitely made his move that time. He started doing very random things that were totally out of character, and they surprised me. He would pick me up from work, and if it had been a beautiful day and I had not been too exhausted, he'd take me on a drive. Sometimes he'd take me to dinner at some fancy restaurant, thankfully not Chris's. On the days that I was off duty, he'd cook me breakfast, take me out for lunch, and we'd go to any fun place of my choice. The attention he paid me made me start to really like him, but I was scared of my emotions. He was much older than me, and in fact, Andrew, his son, was the same age as me. I did not want to interpret his goodwill as him having feelings for me, so I did not end up with the wrong conclusion. So after the whole back and forth thing with Sam, he finally came clean about his feelings and asked me to marry him. Yes. We never actually did the whole boyfriend and girlfriend thing. We just went straight into planning a wedding because, according to a philosopher, life's too short. My parents had disagreed at first because they thought of Sam as being too old for me, and I had rebutted their claims. They had eventually agreed with my choice, not because I gave them more choice. We got married very quickly. It had been a short and quick wedding with just my parents and some of Sam's friends. Andrew had not been able to attend the wedding because ever since his mom died, he had lived with his aunt in another state and had never seen the need to come home. I did not feel the need for him to be around because, well, let's just say Andrew and I weren't big on being friends even as kids. He had always been unfriendly to me, and surprisingly, he never was to my parents. In fact, he respected them, and they adored him. But he never really liked me, and I never actually cared. Sam got my parents a house because he felt it was not appropriate for them to live with us, especially because they kept insisting on earning their keep. So with my parents gone, it had been Sam and me alone in the house for a whole year, and it was blissful. Sam was just the sweetest husband. He went out of his way to do things for me, especially because he knew how hectic my job as a resident was. He was a really supportive husband, and probably because he was old, He never wanted any younger guys coming after me. He tried as much as possible to do things that pleased me. When the job got too hectic, I decided to quit and just become a stay-at-home wife, and Sam had not objected to my choice. When I told my parents about my decision to quit my job, they advised me against it because of how hard I had worked to get there. But I hadn't listened to them, of course. I did as I pleased and I quit. Soon enough, staying at home for that long a period just got tiring, especially because my body had somehow gotten used to the late nights I kept, attending to patients or the emergencies that seemed to drive through the hospital doors at every moment. The thrill and excitement you felt when you diagnosed the right ailment and administered the right treatment for them, the horror of having to lose a patient because there was nothing you could have done to help them, and having to eventually tell their families the sad news. I loved it all. I don't mean I loved the loss of patients, though. Getting really tired after saving or attending to too many patients, and having to eat sandwiches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because you were too tired to whip yourself up a meal. Although living with Sam, he took care of my meals, so I ate well in comparison to other doctors. But after 2 months of staying at home with nothing but my husband for company all day, I began to crave the thrill of working at the hospital again. So I decided to pick up a hobby, and I started with golf. Sam had friends in the golf club and went on most weekends to hang out with them, but this time I decided to join him, which had surprised him pleasantly. Within a few minutes of the ball rolling, the clapping, and the excitement of getting the balls in the small hole created in the ground, it faded off quickly. But Sam had seemed to be enjoying himself so much, especially because he was chatting with his friends about different things. I waited patiently through the game so we could go home. I wanted to do something to actually make Sam happy because I was usually always the one at the receiving end. And if I could do something as simple as waiting patiently through a boring game to make him happy, then I felt glad to do that. I loved Sam, right? And despite the age difference, I wanted to make him happy. So I started trying for a baby. I tried unsuccessfully for some months, and I even went to a fertility clinic and was told I was very fertile, but I still couldn't get pregnant. And I knew how much it would mean to Sam if I got pregnant. Since his wife died early, they couldn't get pregnant with a second child because she had insisted that Andrew be a certain age before they had more kids. But eventually, when they started trying for another kid, she hadn't gotten pregnant until she died. I tried really hard to get pregnant, doing all the stuff I was told to in the hospital, and I even did some crazy stuff from the internet, too. I was married 2 years to Sam before Andrew eventually showed up. Sam almost had a heart attack. He had heard some news about one of his major investments being investigated by the police, and that had led his weak heart, which could not take the news, to react. Luckily for us, my parents had been around that day, so they had taken charge and called the ambulance while I just stood there panicking. But thankfully, it had not been something too serious, but he had been advised to take it easy. If I had thought of Sam as a handsome man, then I had probably been daydreaming. Andrew, although his father's replica, looked much more handsome, and if I had not been married to his father at that point, I would have definitely fallen for him. He had apparently returned temporarily because he had needed to see his father for himself and confirm that he was fine. I had expected that he would probably hop on the next plane the next week and fly back to wherever he had been coming from. But Andrew continued staying with us after his father had been cleared by the hospital and strictly advised to take things easy. Andrew still had not left until his father had asked him playfully if he was returning anytime soon, and he had given a negative answer. I had not been comfortable with that because it meant living with Andrew when we weren't even on speaking terms. Well, that did not go on for long because, surprisingly, Andrew started speaking to me. At first, it had been a random good morning or the highs and hellos he said, and I had been so shocked at first, I hadn't even known how to respond, but eventually I began to. Then he started speaking to me casually, sometimes randomly about the weather or his father or something, and it began to bother me a whole lot. I did not know why he just started speaking to me like we were friends before, but I decided to let it go, thinking he had probably been doing so because his dad asked him to. But another day, Andrew had come home from where he went, and he had bought me flowers. I had been so confused that I asked him if the flowers were really for me, and he laughed and answered that he never thought his father, who was the only other person in the house, liked receiving flowers. So randomly after that time, Andrew would bring home flowers for me, and soon it graduated into giving me gifts. He would buy me an expensive necklace or earrings. Sometimes it would be some clothes and even shoes, and he somehow managed to get my sizes each time. Whenever I refused the gifts, he would insist I take them. I mentioned Andrew's random acts of giving me gifts to his father, and he had laughed it off, saying he, Andrew, probably now saw sense and wanted to make things right between us. I did not think so, but I kept quiet about it because I hadn't wanted to upset Sam. Andrew continued with his gifting until one time I had to stop him. He had done something way worse than just buying me gifts and making me uncomfortable. Apparently, his friends had decided to come visit him, and he had told me earlier about it. Sam had gone out with his friends to play golf that weekend, and I had planned to do some studying because I had started contemplating going back to working as a doctor. So I had decided to stay out of their way because I did not want anything to do with them. I heard them laughing loudly and making noise, talking about girls and the usual stuff boys would usually talk about, but I plugged in my headphones to filter their voices out. After 2 hours, I had become very hungry, and I decided to sneak into the kitchen to make some snacks for myself. Thinking that Andrew and his friends were in his room, I had gone into the kitchen only to meet Andrew and his friends right in the kitchen making a mess. I heard one of his friends whistle and whisper, which was definitely loud enough for me to hear, to another guy that Andrew's father's wife was definitely sexy. I pretended I did not hear the comments and just instead got a juice and left. I had been really mad, but I waited until Andrew's friends left before I confronted him about them. Well, let's just say the confrontation did not exactly end with Andrew apologizing. It had ended up with Andrew and me in his bedroom, on his bed, without clothes. I know. I regretted it as soon as I was able to climb out of his bed and rush back to mine and my husband's. I felt really stupid for having cheated on Sam, especially with his son. I kept beating myself mentally for having sex with Andrew. The worst part was I enjoyed the whole thing. It was like being married to Sam made me forget just how agile young men were sexually, and especially because ever since Sam's incident, even sex had been taken easily. We did not do exciting stuff because I was scared to lose him. In fact, most times I did all the work while he just laid there. So which made the sex I had with Andrew very much exciting and better. He had definitely been better than his father in bed. But I loved Sam and did not want to jeopardize our marriage, so I had planned to tell Andrew that it had been a one-time thing and it couldn't happen again. But it did happen. Over and over again, in fact, until having sex with Andrew was almost like an addiction. I even stopped having sex with Sam totally because he had become a boring lover compared to Andrew, and I gave excuses of his health whenever he, Sam, tried to initiate sex. It continued that way for months. Andrew and I were like children who were sneaking out to do what their parents were clearly against. I hung out with Andrew more, even at the house, sometimes even when Sam was in the house. At first, Sam had been happy seeing both of us bonding and finally relating well, but he started complaining about me spending all my time with Andrew, and I had made excuses that I was only trying to get to know him better because he was his Sam's son, and Sam had not said anything again. One time my mom had come visiting, and since they worked in the house for a long time, she knew the passcode and everything, so she let herself in and found me coming out of Andrew's room wearing nothing save a shirt of Andrew's. My mother had been shocked, and I had lied that I had just gone to ask him for his advice on something. My mother had not believed me and warned me severely to stay away from Andrew and not try to hurt Sam. If you know me by now from all I've written about myself, you'd know I definitely have never listened to any advice my parents gave, which definitely included this one. I continued my affair with Andrew, my stepson, because the sex was just so good. One time, Andrew had actually brought home a guest, a girl named Sandra. I knew why he had done that. It had been to allay his father's and my parents' suspicion about us, but somehow I had felt really jealous. Sam had invited my parents for dinner at our place. It had been my birthday, and I had told him I just wanted a simple celebration with just our families around. So when Andrew had brought the girl home, Sam had been pleasantly surprised because Andrew had never brought home any girl. Through the dinner, I had to pretend I was enjoying myself and also liking the girl he brought home. It had been stressful for me, keeping up the act the entire time, but I did. Sam had gifted me an expensive new brand of car earlier that day, and then right in front of our families, he had given me a key to a new massive shopping complex he had built for me. I had been happy, especially because I saw how jealous Andrew had been when Sam had kissed me, and I had reciprocated. It pleased me, and then when everyone had retired to bed, and my parents and the girl Sandra had gone back to their place, Andrew had texted me to come to his room when his father fell asleep. I waited patiently until I was sure Sam had slept, and I sneaked out of bed and went to Andrew's room. Without saying anything to each other, we just had what I'd call mindless sex. We had sex mindlessly until we were both exhausted and had fallen asleep in each other's arms. It was morning when I realized where exactly I was, and I quickly left his room. Luckily, Sam had not been awake when I crept back into bed and pretended to sleep. Well, I guess a secret never remains a secret for long because eventually Sam caught Andrew and me red-handed. A day before that, Sam had told me he wanted to go on a trip to supervise some work himself. Sam had never really had to do much except grow his money right in the comfort of his house because he employed the right people who helped manage most of his business affairs. But on some days like this, he had to personally be there to do some stuff. Andrew would have been the one going, but Andrew had never taken any interest in his father's company besides spending the money he got from it. So Sam had to do everything himself. So he had told me about his trip, which this time was actually planned to be a 2-day trip. So the morning of the day he was supposed to travel, I had woken up tired from the night before. I had finally had sex with Sam that night because I hadn't wanted him thinking I was cheating on him, and it had been an "I'll miss you" sex. So I woke up rather late, and when I noticed that Sam's side of the bed was rather cool, which meant he had been up early and probably gone. I do not know why I had not even confirmed correctly if he had really left, but my brain had felt so jumbled up, and the only thing I wanted was an orgasm from Andrew as I couldn't get one with Sam. So I had just showered, worn my newest collection of lingerie — collecting lingerie was like a bad addiction of mine — and gone up to Andrew's room. We did not have to say anything to each other to know what we both wanted. I had just stripped down, and we had gotten down to business. We were very much into the act until I heard a faint gasp and some things drop on the floor. Looking up, it had been Sam. He was watching us in pure horror, and there were some groceries scattered on the floor. I froze, as did Andrew. We had been caught red-handed, and there was no lying our way out of it. Sam had, after recovering from the shock, just walked away. It's been 3 whole days now, and Sam has not said a word to me. I've tried apologizing, but Sam barely spares me a glance now, let alone listens to my jaded speech about why I did what I did. I really feel so bad, and I cannot lose Sam. I really need to get back my husband. I still love him very much, and the thought of losing him is like a knife to my heart. Please, guys, help me. What do you think I could do to get Sam to forgive me? Update. Hello, Reddits. I feel so much. All of the feelings I have right now are definitely not good. Sam finally reacted, in a very bad way. He divorced me, left me nothing, and would not even let me apologize for what I did. He left the house he bought for my parents, though, but even my parents wouldn't let me back into the house. They are so disappointed in me. But they cannot be as disappointed in me as I am. I feel so stupid. I don't know how I ever thought I could get away with cheating on Sam. Truth is, I love Sam very much, and I still do, but I cannot even blame the devil for my stupidity. Sam sent Andrew away back to where he lived before. I guess you couldn't cut blood ties that easily, but you could dispose of a cheating wife very easily. I feel as dumb as a dumbbell. It's so hard living now. I cannot even get myself to get up most days. I feel like I'm drowning in the weight of my own sin. I wish I had not done what I did to hurt Sam. Sam loved me so much and did everything for me, and yet the only thing I repaid him with was sleeping with his son. I beat myself up mentally every day. The insulting comments and backlashes were welcome guests as I have nothing else or no one else who. I'm really sorry, Sam. I really am sorry.